screen sharing here. All right, and if I still have you all right, that's good. Okay, very good. I'm so sorry for that. Okay, next time I'll have to come and give it to you in person, so I don't do that. My bad. All right, yeah. So thank you so much, yeah, for being here. We appreciate it. McLean County, wonderful. You all do so much good work. I was saying, and I hope I don't repeat myself when I say this, I know McLean County is doing wonderful. I love that McLean County is one of the few downstate counties to gain population in the census. So that's very cool. In 2020, there's not many counties south of I-80 that can say that. So we appreciate your work. We know you all are doing so many wonderful things. And that's why we're so happy to do this. We do these talks across the state. I love spending time in McLean County, so it's good to do one a little closer to home, even though we are over a virtual format here. And as I said, in the promotional material, I will be talking about bills that passed this spring, but I also am going to talk about some legislation that didn't pass, both good and bad, as well as topics of conversation in Springfield that have been ongoing that I think are going to be important to you all. So I'm going to get into this here. All right, and I'm so glad I still have you. So sorry about that, you all. I've personally been with the Chamber for about 3 years. My main focus is infrastructure-related legislation for the Chamber. But I also handle many of our general legislative issues, general chamber issues, just as a staff member of the chamber. I know you in the McLean County Chamber probably feel the same way, that you often wear many hats and do many duties. And that is what's so wonderful about the format of this organization. If you receive any of our weekly newsletters, I have a role in those handling, that's outside of lobbying. So our main focus here for government affairs is our lobbying, but it's also about connecting that information back to you all folks in our membership. So newsletters, these types of talks, those are types of things that I handle as a day-to-day basis outside of the Infrastructure Council. And if some of our, as you can see here, if some of our discussion goes too far into the subject matter of one of the council directors, I can happily connect you with them, who's an issue expert in that area. Like I said, I like to handle infrastructure topics. I've been doing that role for about 9 months, but we have many wonderful directors who are policy experts for their area. The 7 policy councils is how we divide our work on a day-to-day basis throughout the spring. If it's an energy issue, environment issue, employment law issue, healthcare, infrastructure, tax, or technology, that's how we divide our work. We have Keith Statz, he runs our tax institute. He's been doing tax and tax law for decades. He's very knowledgeable on that subject. Our VP for Government Affairs, Clark Carricker, he's also our issue expert for healthcare and technology issues. So if there's some conversation that you'd like to go further into, I'm happy to connect you to them and they can answer some more of those questions. And we could do many talks on this, but today will be a nice overview for you all. All right, so moving on here, but before we get started, I do want to ask you if anybody on the call would like to share what business they're from, some of the work they're doing, just so that we can kind of move this conversation in the most productive way. And I always like to hear what some of the businesses we have here. Does anybody want to share what their business is and what their industry is?
Sure. My name's Julie Schiefling. I'm with Easter Seals Central Illinois, and our mission is to provide the exceptional services to children with disabilities and developmental delays and special needs.
Great to meet you. Anyone else? I see many wonderful names on here. If anybody else got anything before we go on, any other industries would like to speak up?
This is Tyler with the Chamber. I'll also add, if people are Zoom multitasking, maybe having lunch right now, they don't want to necessarily speak, feel free to put in your chat for Andrew your business or your industry sector, so he can kind of know the audience. If you wouldn't mind doing that, the chat function on your Zoom would work. Thanks. Yeah, I don't know if I said before I got cut the first time. I'm like, I know. I've been on plenty of 12 o'clock calls, so I know the atmosphere. I know there's going to be many lunches being eaten right now, and I hope not to distract you all from that too much, because I am a big fan of the lunch hour myself. So all right, well, I'm going to get into it then. So this year was the most normal legislative session experience since 2019. So I've been doing this since 2020 at the Chamber. So this was actually my first normal session after 3 years of
truncated legislative sessions, first because of COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021. Those reduced the number of session days drastically. And then in 2022, really because of the effects of COVID, well, because those reduced number of days in the 2021 legislative session, as well as the delayed census numbers for 2020, the primary for the 2022 election was moved back to June. And for various reasons, and they wanted to reduce last year's session, so that adjourned in April. We really only had one strong month of session in 2022. So this year we adjourned on May 27th, and that was the first normal session once again. That's I know that's for better or worse, because sometimes I know the folks in the business community can feel a little more at ease when the legislator is out of session. So depending on how you feel about this, either way, that was our first normal one we've had since 2019. Got out on May 27th. That was a full year of work. Our end of session report was 50 pages. So I'm going to be happy to send that to you. I'll send that to Ashley after presentation. If you'd like to, whoever would like a copy of that, that is basically this presentation, except in a 50 pages, and it's in written format. So if that's more your preferred style, and also it just goes a little deeper into some of the issues and gives you links to all the bills that we're going to talk about. And I'm happy to send you that report. We had nearly 7,000 bills introduced. There were 6,700 bills itself. And if you count the resolutions, the legislation that we tracked this year was over 7,000. That's quite a number for just one spring, because of course the next part of the session, the rest of the General Assembly, we're going to see in 2024. They're going to have they're going to be introducing thousands more bills. So it's been very busy. A lot of things that have impact on businesses across the state. Just a little bit of breakdown of what the General Assembly is currently looking like. We have in the House, the current breakdown is 78 Democrats and 40 Republicans. And the Senate, there's 40 Democrats and 19 Republicans. Both the House and Senate Republicans have new leadership this year. The Senate Democrats had new leadership in 2020, and the House Democrats, replacing longtime Speaker Mike Madigan, House Speaker Emmanuel Chris Welch came into office as a speaker in 2021. So after all this time, we hear about long tenured members of the Illinois House, Illinois Senate. We hear of this, but actually the Illinois General Assembly has seen a lot of change in leadership in just the last few years. If you have in 2020 is the longest tenured leader, you see how a lot of that transition has been occurring, a lot of institutional change. So that's something just to keep in mind over the coming years is a lot of that change that we've seen in Springfield, and a lot of that challenge is faced by those new folks in leadership. All right, so now speaking of, I'm going to break down two things. I'm going to talk about some of the victories that we saw for the business community from our perspective, and also just a couple of the losses here. And then after I talk about these two broader categories, I'm going to go into some of those issue areas I mentioned about. I'll go a little quicker over those issue areas because some of you folks might have more interest in other areas and some might have no interest in a certain area, and I don't want to get you bogged down in some of those topics. So I'm going to spend a little more time on the victories section here, mention the losses, and get into those. So the first thing I'd like to say is that we were able to get past a online permitting portal. House Bill 3017, it was sponsored by Representative Yednock and Senator Villavlom, passed out of the House and Senate both unanimously. This bill was a joint initiative of the Illinois Chamber and the Illinois Environmental Regulatory Group to assist businesses in obtaining environmental permits for large-scale projects. So we believe this is going to be a tool to spur economic development statewide, creating an online permitting portal for new existing permits for an investment of $20 million or greater. We think with such permit portal, businesses seeking those permits are going to have better access to timelines and the process to get agency approval for their permits. And we see really why this matters, I think, to everyone, even if you're not making $20 million investments in area, right? There is that type of investment throughout the state. In McLean County, we never know when some of these some business might want to invest $20 million and needs an environmental permit. And that's going to be very helpful for them, but I think we have a lot of potential growth for this. Just a portal where businesses can track a permit they need. They see where it is. They see the timeline they need. There's a lot of potential for growth for smaller projects and different types of projects in years going forward. So this was just the first year. We got this passed into law. I think there's a lot of growth potential for that type of product where the state is creating a online website where you, a business, can go and see what type of permits you need, what the process is to get them, and what a timeline is. And I think that's a really good precedent that the state set. And we thank the General Assembly for setting that type of precedent going forward. So we were able to stop a couple bad things as well. If you look over here on your list, we do have that misclassification of independent contractors to stop. I know many businesses throughout our state and many on this call maybe use independent contractors in their day-to-day actions. But independent contractors are a critical part of our economy. 4 years ago, California passed AB 5, which made their usage exceedingly difficult, transitioning many of these independent contractors into an employee status. The Attorney General's office attempted to bring this law to Illinois. We found it to be a terrible move, and it would really bring that classification change. And we think that's going to hurt a lot of businesses that use independent contractors. One of the main priorities of the chamber this year, our chamber, was preventing the movement of this bill. And we were able to do that. We were able to put together a group of lobbyists from across the state, groups like the IMA, who's a good partner of us, and many other groups who were able to stand against this misclassification of independent contractors, and we were able to put a stop to it for this year. And we're going to keep you updated on that going forward. But that was something that we found really concerning. It never even got filed. There was draft language, but we never even saw that bill filed. So we saw that as a win, and we're going to be keeping an eye on that in the years to come. Autonomous vehicles. There was some premature legislation introduced that we did not think was helpful for the business climate in the state or for that specific industry. 4 bills were introduced, 2 that greatly restricted autonomous vehicles industry, and 2 that pretty much restricted their sale in the state outright. I know not everyone here on this call will be using AVs in the future, either personally or for their businesses, but the benefits of that industry we think is going to be helpful across the board. I mean, we identify things such as safer roads, reduced congestion, less delays overall, and potential for things like increased speed would come with autonomous vehicles. And there's a lot of industries, from agriculture to transportation and freight and movement of goods, that want to use autonomous vehicles. But we think the precedent that would have been set by prematurely regulating the industry is really what we're glad we were able to stop. I mean, from an innovation perspective, it's important that it is not set a precedent in which our state begins to overly regulate industries that offer a lot of economic value, but are just at its inception. So we were glad to see autonomous vehicle restrictions stopped this year. That was something we were engaged on, something that my colleague Clark and I were engaged on personally. So we were glad to see that stop. So now just transitioning a little bit, you'll see in your top middle box, we saw the first Medicaid rate increase in 28 years. So providers will see their first increase since 1995. They requested a 20% increase, but will receive 10% increase for reimbursement for Medicaid services. If the reimbursement had kept up with inflation, the hospitals should have seen a 96% increase. We still see this as a victory for the hospitals, and something that was very much necessary. So talking more about bad bills that were stopped this year that we saw as a victory, a consumer health data bill with a private right of action, that could be another litigation frenzy like BIPA that I'm about to mention on the next slide, that was stopped for the year. Under this bill, consumer health data had a definition that was too broad to be meaningful. It was going to be touching a lot of businesses, both large and small, and it would include data about what data had to be protected under this bill. It had to be things from purchases of goods that people use every day, anything from shoes to toilet paper, deodorant. It was a far-ranging definition that had a lot of implications for businesses of all sizes. We were glad to see that bill stopped. It's something that we were, I don't believe saw a lot of media coverage throughout the year, but it's just one of those bills that once it gets in, starts making broad definitions of data privacy that I think would have hurt a lot of businesses of all sizes. We were able to stop also environmental justice language that we found to be pretty harmful for this year. We, alongside a coalition of other statewide businesses and business groups, were able to stop House Bill 2520. Versions of this bill had a $100,000 fee for permits in certain areas of the state, but overall, we felt this bill to be a detriment to investment in the state and its communities that proponents aim to protect. We understand that environmental justice, it's a very sensitive issue, and we want to work on it going forward as we did this year. But if that legislation would have got through, it would have put a lot of restrictions on communities throughout the state on how investment can be handled and what type of businesses can come in, when they can come in, the timeline for new businesses. And we were able to stop that legislation. And it's one of those that if you closely follow Springfield media, you've probably heard about environmental justice legislation, but outside of that Springfield media circle, environmental justice legislation isn't often spoken of, but it would have had far-ranging implications for communities of all sizes across the state. And that's a overview of some of those victories. So we saw a couple bills pass that we really wanted to see, but as it often is in Springfield, for better or worse, we're often playing defense, you might say, at the Illinois Chambers, that we're trying to stop a lot of bad legislation that could impact your business, that could impact every business across the state, Central Illinois to Southern Illinois to Chicagoland. All right, so I just want to talk about now two things that we saw as losses for the business community. And the first that I want to mention is that punitive damages were added to the Wrongful Death Act, and also a lack of BEPA reform. So just two quick issues here. Currently, so under the Wrongful Death Act, only actual damages can be had under the Wrongful Death Act, but now punitive damages have been added. So aside from the increased damages that some businesses will face under this, it's a smaller number of businesses that might be see litigation under this type of act. But what we really see as one of the big problems with the passage of this bill is that aside from the increased damages faced by some businesses, we also just generally believe that Illinois has a lawsuit climate that is seen as poor, that we believe is a poor lawsuit climate. And we just generally believe that this hurts that business climate in the state and adds to our reputation as being a place for lawsuits and a place in need of lawsuit reform. As the chamber and businesses, we want to see attraction and growth, right? And we don't see these new damages, how they can make us a stronger place for business. So that was a bill that we requested its veto, and one that we see as a unfortunate passage this year. And then number two, there's also a lack of BEPA reform. For those of you who are not familiar with BEPA, businesses of all sizes have been sued under this act. Since 2019 is really the emergence of this lawsuit crisis. The BIPA is the Biometric Information Privacy Act. It was enacted in 2008, but created a lawsuit frenzy that really began in 2019, and it continues today with thousands of lawsuits filed under the act without alleging any harm. So businesses of all sizes, like I said, they've been sued under BIPA, and reform is needed. If you think of what BIPA might be, if your business is using, or before you were made aware of this act, if you're using things like fingerprint scans for timekeeping, or eye scans as a tool for the workplace without consent, employers can be sued for every instance of this data collection. And one case we often cite is things like hospitals who lock up drugs, so that very high value drugs, very, very dangerous drugs that they don't want just anybody getting to. Possibly a fingerprint scan would have been used to keep those drugs secure. And a fingerprint scan without consent, an employer could be sued. So we saw some small healthcare providers sued under this act, and it's been really detriment. There's been settlements into the millions. And it's been very hard on the state, and we've been advocating reform for years now, and it's something that still has not come yet. And it's something that's the detriment to the state, it's detriment to businesses. And if your business or businesses that you know of are still using biometrics as a timekeeping tool, as possibly a safety tool for your business, but you haven't changed that or gotten the consent, I would definitely recommend speaking to your who maybe possibly handles your employment law, talking to them about that issue. BIPA is very important. We want to see reform, haven't seen it yet. We're going to keep advocating for that next year and the years going forward until we can achieve that. All right, so breaking down some more general categories. I know state revenue is important to everyone. State revenue and taxation. It's always a critical topic here. And I want to recap some of the end of year negotiations. So this year's general funds budget will be around $50.5 billion. That is $50.6 billion in revenue and $50.42 billion in spending. I do have to say there, in a broad sense, there are no major concerns for the business community within the budget. We didn't oppose the budget this year, but we will always closely monitor revenue throughout the year. We always do that to make sure that there are matching projections. So what the projections look like for FY24, we're always tracking those to make sure that the projections are match what's actually coming in, and that no crisis is on the horizon that would lead to harmful legislation proposals for the biz community. That's what you often see. I think it was we saw it in spring of 2021 that revenue was not where the state wanted to see it at, and the governor unfortunately had to go back on some commitments that were made in 2019 and to close loopholes, as the governor had said, and some legislation that we did not want to see arose in 2021 because the revenue projections were not where the governor's office wanted to see them. So that's so important to us, is that right now we have a balanced budget. The budget's been signed into law, but we want to make sure that those projections hold up so that some unfortunate legislation doesn't emerge in the fall or next spring that we will have to come back to you and say, look what's happening, and need opposition. So right now, that's the current state of the budget. And this topic, though, it's especially important because with such a thin revenue and spending margin, we have to make sure those projections hold up. So session was originally scheduled to conclude on May 19th this year, but adjournment of the General Assembly was pushed back into the morning of May 27th, partially due to those budget negotiations. We have to say, though, on the tax front as well, this was a very quiet tax year in Springfield. If you joined any of our Monday afternoon calls, if you're part of our Illinois Chamber membership, and you were a part of our Monday afternoon calls ever, Keith Stats, who handles our tax, he often said this was a very quiet tax year, but we did see quite a bit of action in the final few days in May. Despite many revenues bills being introduced, good bills and bad bills, the Chamber had a lot of good revenue initiatives that did not receive consideration. But in the final 2 weeks, there was heightened discussions, and there were a couple tax omnibus bills that were eventually passed into law. And if you would like a breakdown of what those omnibus bills included, we have our end of session report, which like I said, I'm happy to send to you, or if you'd like to contact Keith Stats, happy for that as well. And you can get more into some of the tax legislation and some of those revenue specifics. But really throughout this year, what we saw this spring was the Revenue Committee held committee after committee and hearing and subject matter hearings on all types of bills. Some of those bills were eventually then moved into the omnibus package. Those couple big bills, hundreds of pages long, and they included some of those proposals, some bad legislative proposals, received their hearing, did not go any further. So we're always happy to see that. And I do have Keith's email there at the bottom if you would like some more revenue information and some more tax information from this spring. All right, so going on to the next category. Employment law and workforce, that is, I know affects so many of our businesses of all sizes. So I just want to talk about these 5 bills very quickly. House Bill 1122. So this bill creates the Freelance Worker Protection Act. It was passed into law. It has not yet been signed by the governor, but it requires written contracts for services or products provided by a freelance worker. So if you utilize a freelance worker at your place of business, I would pay special attention to this bill. This written contract is going to be required, and this bill also sets forth some of the information that's going to be required that the Department of Labor will have to put out. The IDOL, Illinois Department of Labor, is going to be the one enforcing this act, and they are to make model contracts available for the public for the use at no cost. So if you use a freelance worker and you pay them more than $500 across a 6-month time period, you would want to make sure that you have a written contract with that worker. just that you do not run afoul of this law and receive enforcement from the Attorney General. We worked hard on this bill. We were able to make some positive changes to it, specifically concerning some of the penalties and some of the private right of action in that bill. But still, it's something you're going to want to pay attention to, and something that requires action from businesses and individuals who use freelance workers. And it does authorize the Attorney General to initiate or intervene in a civil action if the Attorney General has reasonable cause to believe that any person is engaged in a practice that is prohibited under the Act. So please, if you do utilize this type of workforce or utilize these type of people on your property, I would pay special attention to House Bill 1122. The same thing goes for House Bill 2862. If you use these type of employees, or not employees, but these type of folks in your workplace. And this bill amends the Day and Temporary Labor Services Act. So under House Bill 2862, a day or temporary laborer who is assigned to work at a third-party client for more than 60 calendar days shall not be paid less than the rate of pay the equivalent benefits as the lowest paid directly hired employee of the third-party client with the same level of seniority at the company. So if you're bringing on temporary workers into your workplace, I would say pay special attention to House Bill 2862, because there will be requirements for how they are paid and what benefits they receive based off of your lowest paid employee and the type of duties performed by that worker. And if you'd like a written explanation of this bill, House Bill 2862, once again, that'll be in the end of session report. And that you might, if you care about that, might want to read a little bit more about 2862. House Bill 3129. This is the employee pay scale bill. It's another one of those bills that we did a lot of work on, that we engaged with the sponsor. It's the strategy, especially of our Employment Law Counsel. Aaron Harris heads up that council. We want to make a bill as good as it can be. Sometimes if you know you can't get a bill defeated, we say, all right, what can we do? Negotiate this bill. Let's make it a little better than it currently is. That was the case for House Bill 3129. It amends the Equal Pay Act of 2003 to require an employer with 15 or more employees to include the pay scale and benefits for a position in any job posting that will be physically performed, at least in part, in Illinois, or positions that will be physically performed outside of Illinois, but the employee reports to a supervisor or office or work site in the state of Illinois. So effective January 1st, 2025, if you have 15 or more employees, you're going to have to start posting that pay scale for those jobs. So we were able to bring that, some of the penalty provisions, we were able to greatly reduce those in the bill, and that was work we did on it. But still, 2025 pay scale is going to be a requirement for new job postings. And then one last employment and workforce bill that I do want to mention, that's Senate Bill 2034. And this is a very sensitive topic, I know, for a lot of folks, for the proponents of this bill. The Senate Bill 2034, we were neutral in this bill. It creates the Child Extended Bereavement Leave Act. It's also known as Zachary's Parent Protection Act. An employee of a large employer that employs 250 or more full-time employees. So if you're an employee of a workplace with 250 or more employees, you're entitled to use a maximum of 12 weeks of unpaid leave if the employee experiences the loss of a child by suicide or homicide. An employee of an employer that employs at least 50 people, so 50 between 250, is entitled to use a maximum of 6 weeks of unpaid leave if the employee experiences the loss of a child by suicide or homicide. The leave may be taken in a single continuous period or intermittently in increments of 4 hours, but the leave must be completed within 1 year after the employee notifies the employer of that loss. So it also permits the employer to require reasonable advance notice of the employee's intention to leave and reasonable documentation, but the employee is entitled to be restored to the position that they left, or restored to an equivalent position. So I know that's a very sensitive topic anytime talking about a child loss, but it is a new requirement on businesses that will be coming into effect, and something that should be taken note of for businesses without at least 50 employees. Okay, so I want to talk about just a few more categories here, and then we can, if you want to come back to any of those, I'm happy to take those questions. Our infrastructure council here, this is the one that I I'm especially in charge of here for the chamber. I do just want to mention a couple quick things. I won't go quite as in depth as I did for the employment law section, but House Bill 2878, we did have a procurement omnibus bill this year. So if this is the industry that you are part of, this bill was rumored for months beforehand, but the 195-page bill, it came into fruition in the final week or so of session. Within that 195-page bill, there was lots of procurement bills that were seen throughout the spring that have to do with how the state does its contracts with businesses throughout the state. And in that 195-page bill, there was a lot of the proposals that we saw throughout the spring. They got all put into this 195-page bill, and it saw passage with large majorities, 53-0 in the Senate and 77-9 in the House. There were some good things in this bill for sure, and there was also some things that were not as desirable in this bill. But overall, it was supported by a lot of industries. It was supported by some of the state universities, and it received a broad range of support, some opposition as well. But House Bill 2878, what I do especially want to mention is that what it does, the thing that I think you'll find most interesting is that it expands the P3 for Transportation Act to include any reasonable public entity instead of just transportation agencies. So it also contains other P3-related expansions, but basically, right now, for a public-private partnership for transportation in the state of Illinois, it currently would only include entities like IDOT and the state tollway, but now includes IDOT, state tollway, any county, municipality, or other unit of local government. So you might see in the coming future some McLean County projects that are done via P3 under this act, and it also expands the way in which some unsolicited proposals can be handled. So if someone has a really good P3 idea, there's an expanded way in which those proposals can be made under the procurement omnibus bill. And if you want a full breakdown of that bill, I encourage you please to read our end-of-session report. I give some more detail, but more than that's necessary for this call right now. I'm not even going to get into all these bills I have up on the screen here, but I do want to mention some that are that one that didn't pass was House Bill 3597. And I mentioned this because it's an important topic of conversation. Is fleet electrification. It's a topic down here a lot in Springfield, and that is how gas-powered engines, right, diesel-powered engines, are being transitioned to electric, and for large trucks. And House Bill 3597 was one of those bills that would have the Illinois EPA establish a voucher program for businesses to convert their fleet from gas and diesel to electric. So it hasn't gained traction yet. Some of these fleet electrification incentives, but the topic of conversation is there. We hear from the trucking industry that the incentives and the vouchers are not nearly enough in many cases to make it attractive for them to make that transition. But the voucher program is out there. There's people on both sides of that issue. But it's all about that energy transition. That's a debate we see at the national stage. We're also seeing it a lot at the state level, and something just to keep in mind in the years going forward. And I do want to mention something that we saw as a victory for our businesses that participate in the veteran-owned business program, House Bill 2288. It was eventually moved into the procurement omnibus package in House Bill 2878. That was an initiative of the chamber that we helped with one of our members. It expanded the definition of a small business for the purposes of the Veteran-Owned Business Act, or Veteran-Owned Business Program rather, from 75 million to 150. So veteran-owned businesses that want to participate in this program, those that were on the edge of the revenue edge, we were able to expand that program for veteran-owned businesses. All right, I just want to mention a couple things. I already talked about environmental justice legislation and some of the impacts that can have on investment in communities, but just a couple other things. Senate Bill 1555 did pass into law. We did have some concerns with that legislation early on. Some requirements was going to put on to businesses for packaging and paper product recycling, but that bill was changed. Instead of some of the onerous requirements that were going to be on manufacturers of paper products and packaging, it has now been changed to a statewide recycling needs assessment. So more of a study that might eventually turn into action in the coming years. But right now, it's just going to be a study. That was some work we did on that bill. Other industry associations. And that was something that could have been a detrimental to businesses, Senate Bill 1555, but we were able to see some positive change there. House Bill 2204, it's a new hydrogen fuel credit for businesses in that industry. It's more of that energy transition talk, but it's a new hydrogen credit that will be in place. And then also House Bill 3445 was a small energy omnibus package, which among other things is going to be studying energy reliability and topics of that nature. And as I keep saying over and over again, our end of session report goes a little bit further into what that omnibus package will concern, what some of those areas of study that will be undertaken under that act. And then my last slide for you all today is technology and healthcare. I combine those two. Some of you might say, why are those two combined? What do they have in relationship to each other? Well, our VP Clark Carricker, he handles both those topics, so I conveniently put them on the same slide. There was all these bills did pass the General Assembly. House Bill 2231. If your business relies on Uber and Lyft to get your customers to the place, or get customers to your business, or maybe moves them away from your business at the close of the day, pay attention. House Bill 2231 did pass into law, and what it does that we find concerning is that it specifies that these transportation carriers, Uber and Lyft, are not, it removes the provision that specifies they are not common carriers. So this is going to open up some potential new liability for these rideshare companies, which we see is going to lead to increased cost. And we are concerned that your next rideshare, the next time one of your customers books a rideshare after this law, after these changes go into effect in January of 2024, that we're going to see more expensive ride shares. And also then sometimes we see this also as a motor safety issue, because when a customer is no longer getting into that ride share, maybe they're leaving a bar or restaurant at the end of the night, they might think they can drive, right? And you might see some increased motor safety issues because of those increased costs of rideshare that we expect due to the passage of this legislation. It was something that we had opposed throughout the year. We couldn't get the bill stopped, and that's something that's going to be going into effect and affecting the rideshare industry and the businesses that rely on the industry. House Bill 3563, it's the Artificial Intelligence Task Force. AI is such a topic on the national level. It made its way to the state level as well. The General Assembly is going to be studying AI and its use. We think that's an important conversation to have. There's a lot of task force made every year by the General Assembly. A lot of times before state action is taken, they want that action backed up by a task force report of some kind, a study of some kind. Private out-of-state data sometimes is sufficient, but oftentimes a report from a state task force or a state commission carries a lot more influence. So House Bill 3563, it really is going to inform further action by the state on the topic of AI. And we want the business community's voice to be part of that task force. So we are going to be looking for a seat on that as the topic of artificial intelligence comes into play. It's going to affect people at national level, state level, the county and local level as well. AI is here, and the state is going to be studying that. And then House Bill 2296 is the last bill I want to mention to you today. It provides for rate review of health insurance in Illinois. So beginning May 1st of 2026, well, beginning on or before that date, and each date thereafter, the Department of Insurance is going to report to the governor and the General Assembly on health insurance coverage, affordability, and cost trends. Beginning plan year 2025, the department shall post all insurers' rate filings and summaries on the department's website. The department shall open a 30-day public comment period on the date that a rate filing is posted on the website. And after the close of the comment section or the comment period, the department shall issue a decision to approve, disapprove, or modify a rate filing within 60 days. So that is something that's new, is coming to the state of Illinois, is rate review for health insurance. So these were so many bills. I know we've had so many topics here. I just covered 7 issue areas in a span of about 35 minutes. So I appreciate your really good attention to this all. Thank you so much. It was nice being with you all today. And if you have any questions, now is the time. Please ask away. I'm happy to talk about anything that was on this presentation, but also if you just have some general questions about legislation that you maybe heard of in media, something that you particularly care about, I'm happy to answer that to the best of my ability as well. And I'll try to answer those. So now is your time. If you have anything, please do open away. And thank you so much for the kind attention.
Yes, Andrew, good morning. It's Julie at Easter Seals.
All right.
We got word that Medicaid reimbursement rates for occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy were increased 5%.
Okay, all right.
Can you tell me, do you know a bill number or something that I can look at? Because we're having a meeting on it on Tuesday, and I want to make sure I go in with the appropriate information.
Yeah, 1298. So House Bill, I believe 1298 is our final number. There was some movement on here. I believe we have it for.
Because when I looked it up, it said went back to Rules Committee, so that's where I got confused.
Yeah, so so as they often do in the state, they moved a lot of bills. They had a lot of shell bills that right, as you know, is they put the topic of one bill onto another. So the original bill numbers were no longer relevant for a lot of these topics.
Right.
And I believe we have Senate Bill 1298. And Clark Carricker, he handles our healthcare. He's going to be back in our office on Monday. If you do want to talk to him more about some of those specifics on that, he'd be happy to do so, and I can get your information if that's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if he could get back. What's his last name?
Clark Carricker. And I actually do, if I'm able to share these slides with you after our presentation, his email's on this presentation, and if you want to shoot him a message. Yeah. Perfect.
That would be great. I'll contact him on Monday then, but I'll look that bill up in the meantime.
Yeah, 1298, Senate Bill 1298.
Andy, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Any other topics of conversation you'd like to talk about? Any other questions on your mind? If so, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I know I just gave you a massive information drop on you all. So I understand if you are all questioned out. So, but I'm here if you have anything. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'll make sure if you could share that presentation with me, that would be fabulous, so that I can share it with all of our participants that came, and then be able to reach out to you, or if anybody has questions, you can reach out to me and I will direct them back to Andrew as well.
All right. Fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for being part of McLean County Chamber. Thank you all for the invitation for me today. I'm always happy to talk about these topics. I know they can be, if you don't have a government affairs team at your place of employment, tracking this stuff can be hard. Like I said, 7,000 bills. It's a lot to manage, and I threw a lot at you today. So thank you so much for your time and your careful attention to it all. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you, everyone.